I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Ashley Williams, and what I'm about to tell you happened right here in Decatur, Georgia, just outside Atlanta. It's a story about the man I loved for 30 years, the mother I'd do anything to protect, and the tiny hidden camera that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. It all came to a head on a Tuesday morning in late February, 7:45 to be exact. I was standing in my kitchen, hands trembling so badly, I had to grip the granite countertop just to stay upright. The smell of Matthew's coffee still hung in the air, but the house was finally quiet. I watched through the window as his silver sedan disappeared down our tree-lined street, and only when I was absolutely certain he was gone, did I let myself breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs like a war drum preparing me for a battle I didn't know if I was ready to fight. On heavy feet, I climbed the stairs past my own bedroom and stopped in front of the door that used to be my son's room. The door that was now my mother's. I turned the knob, slowly stepped inside, and went straight to the bookshelf. Behind a dusty photo of the three of us, me, Matthew, and our son Daniel, back when he was a smiling little boy, was the tiny camera I'd installed 5 nights ago. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the minuscule memory card. A little piece of plastic that held either proof of my own paranoia or evidence of an evil I could barely wrap my head around. But for you to understand just how things got to that awful point, and why I ended up spying on my own husband in my own home, let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Ashley Williams. I'm 54 years old, and until a few months ago, my biggest worry was whether the azaleas in my front garden needed more fertilizer. I'm a retired high school history teacher, taught at Decatur High for 28 years before I retired 3 years back. I used to joke that I'd seen enough teenage drama to last 3 lifetimes, that nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. I've been married to Matthew for 30 years. 30 years. We met when I was 24, fresh out of college with my teaching degree and more idealism than sense. He was 26, already making a name for himself as a junior financial analyst at a firm downtown. We met at a barbecue at my friend Sarah's house. You know how these things go. He wore a navy polo shirt and had this confident smile that made my stomach flip. We talked for 3 hours straight, sitting on Sarah's back porch while fireflies danced in the twilight. 6 months later, we were engaged. A year after that, married in a small ceremony at the Episcopal Church on Candler Street. My mother, Michelle, walked me down the aisle because my father had walked out on us when I was 7. She wore a pale blue dress and cried through the entire ceremony. Matthew's parents flew in from Ohio, stiff formal people who barely cracked a smile, but they were there. We bought this house in Decatur when I was 28. A beautiful 2-story colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a backyard big enough for the family we planned to have. Matthew worked long hours climbing the corporate ladder, eventually making it to financial director at his firm. I taught during the day and graded papers at night. We had a good life. Not fancy, but solid. Real. We had 2 children. Emma came first, and 3 years later, Daniel. God, Daniel. My beautiful boy with his father's dark hair and my green eyes. He loved baseball, played shortstop all through high school. His room upstairs was covered in pennants and trophies. He wanted to be a sports journalist, had already been accepted to UGA's journalism program. And then 7 years ago, everything changed. Daniel was 27 when he started feeling tired all the time. Said he couldn't shake this flu. When the bruises appeared on his arms and legs, bruises he couldn't remember getting, we finally dragged him to the doctor. The diagnosis came back like a death sentence: acute myeloid leukemia. Aggressive, fast-moving. We fought it. God, how we fought. Chemotherapy that made him so sick he couldn't lift his head. Bone marrow transplants that didn't take. I took a leave from teaching to be with him, sitting in those cold hospital rooms hour after hour, watching my baby boy waste away under fluorescent lights that made his skin look gray. Matthew threw himself into work. He'd come to the hospital after his shift stay for an hour, then leave. Said he couldn't stand seeing Daniel like that. I told myself he was grieving in his own way, that everyone handles pain differently. I made excuses for him even then. Daniel died on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 months after his diagnosis. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. Matthew was in the hallway on a work call. He didn't make it back into the room in time to say goodbye. We buried our son in Oak Hill Cemetery under a dogwood tree that blooms every spring. The funeral was packed. Daniel had so many friends, so many people who loved him. I remember standing at the graveside watching them lower the casket into the ground and feeling like part of my soul was being buried with him. Matthew stood next to me, dry-eyed in his black suit, squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. That night we went home to this too-quiet house, and Matthew finally broke. He sobbed in our bedroom, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. I held him and stroked his hair and told him it would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. But something changed in Matthew after that. He became distant, remote. He'd come home from work and go straight to his study or turn on the TV. We'd eat dinner in silence. We stopped sleeping in the same bed he said he couldn't sleep, preferred the guest room. The physical distance became emotional distance. We were living like roommates in our own house, two people orbiting the same grief, but never quite connecting. Emma called from Austin, where she'd moved with her husband and newborn daughter, checking on us constantly. "Mom, are you okay?" she'd ask. "How's Dad?" I'd tell her we were fine, that we were managing, because what else could I say? That her father had become a stranger, that I felt more alone in my marriage than I ever had as a single person. The truth was, by the time my mother started showing signs of dementia 3 years ago, Matthew and I were already living separate lives under the same roof. The foundation of our marriage, the solid ground I thought we stood on, had been cracked for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it. My mother, Michelle Porter, was the strongest woman I've ever known. She raised me by herself after my father left, working 2 jobs, daytime receptionist at a dentist's office and weekend shifts at a diner to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. She taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up every single time. She was 82 when I first noticed the changes. Little things at first. She'd call me 3 times in one day asking the same question. She'd start a story and then trail off, forgetting what she was talking about. Once I stopped by her apartment and found her staring into her refrigerator with a confused expression, as if she couldn't remember what she'd been looking for. "Just getting old, sweetheart," she'd say with a laugh when I asked if she was okay. "Brain's not as sharp as it used to be." But then the incidents got worse. She left her stove on and nearly started a fire. A neighbor found her wandering the parking lot at 3 in the morning in her nightgown, disoriented and crying. When I took her to her doctor, Dr. Hayes sat us down with gentle eyes and gave us the diagnosis: early-stage dementia, likely Alzheimer's. "It will progress," he said quietly. "Slowly at first, then more rapidly. She'll need increasing levels of care." For a while, Mom managed in her apartment with daily check-ins from me and help from her neighbors. I'd drive over every morning before school to make sure she'd taken her medications and had breakfast. I'd call her at lunch. I'd stop by after work. It was exhausting, but she was my mother. She'd given up everything for me. How could I do any less for her? But 6 months ago, in early October, things reached a crisis point. I got a call from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, saying Mom had forgotten where she lived and was trying to get into the wrong apartment. When I arrived, I found her sitting on the hallway floor, crying and confused, asking for her own mother. My grandmother, who'd been dead for 20 years. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea cooling in front of me, knowing what I had to do. I called Emma first. "Honey, it's about Grandma," I said. "She can't live alone anymore. It's not safe." There was a long pause on the line. "Mom, I wish I could help, but..." Emma's voice cracked. "Tommy's only 6 months old and Jake just started his new job. Our house is barely 1,000 square feet. I don't see how..." "I know, sweetheart. I know." I stared at the wall at the family photos hanging there. "It's okay. I wasn't calling to ask. I just wanted to let you know what's happening." Which left only one option, the one I'd been avoiding thinking about for weeks. I had to ask Matthew. I waited until after dinner. Matthew had eaten his pot roast in silence, scrolling through something on his tablet while I pushed food around my plate. When he stood up to take his dishes to the sink, I finally spoke. "Matthew, I need to talk to you about Mom." He stopped his back to me. "What about her?" "It's getting to be too much for her to be alone. She's getting worse. I think..." I swallowed hard. "I think she needs to come live with us." He turned around slowly, and the expression on his face made my stomach drop. It wasn't surprise or concern. It was calculation. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. "And you want her to move in here?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, flat and cold. "She's my mother, Matthew. I can't just put her in a home. Not yet. She's still lucid most of the time. She just needs someone to I know what she needs, Ashley. He set his plate down with a sharp click. An elderly person with dementia changes everything, the whole dynamic of a house, our routine, our privacy, our peace and quiet. I know it's not ideal, but not ideal. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ashley, I warned you years ago that we needed to think about this possibility. I told you we should look into facilities plan ahead, but you kept saying not yet, not yet. Well, now yet is here. The way he said it, like Mom was some problem I'd failed to handle properly, made anger flare hot in my chest. But I swallowed it down. I needed him to say yes. I'll handle everything, I said quickly. I'm retired, so I have the time. You won't have to do anything. I'll be the one taking care of her. Managing her medications, her appointments, everything. It won't affect your life at all. Matthew stared at me for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, he sighed a long, tired sound that made me feel like a burden he was choosing to bear. All right, he said. She can come, but on one condition. I weighted my heart in my throat. He stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice was firm. You have to be the primary caregiver. I've got my job, my commitments at the golf club, my responsibilities. I can't be here around the clock on call. The responsibility has to be entirely on you. Do you understand? Relief washed over me so powerfully I almost cried. I nodded rapidly. Yes, of course. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. He nodded curtly and left the kitchen. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of his study door closing. I sat alone in that kitchen in the house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, and I told myself I was grateful. He'd said yes. That was what mattered. I didn't let myself think about the coldness in his voice, or the way he'd made me feel like I was asking for an enormous favor instead of discussing my mother's care. I didn't let myself wonder why my husband's first instinct was to set boundaries instead of offering support. I should have. God, I should have. Mom moved in the second week of October. Emma flew in from Austin to help with the transition, and together we transformed Daniel's old room into a space for Mom. That was the hardest part, clearing out Daniel's things. His baseball trophies still lined the shelves. His Braves pennant still hung on the wall. I found an old t-shirt of his in the closet, and when I pressed it to my face, it still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat on the floor of that closet and cried for 20 minutes while Emma rubbed my back and cried with me. We don't have to do this room, Mom, she said softly. There's the guest room downstairs. No, I wiped my eyes and stood up. That room is too small and the bathroom's not as accessible. This is the right room. Daniel would want his grandma here. He loved her. So we packed Daniel's trophies carefully into boxes and carried them up to the attic. We took down the pennant, folded it with reverence, and put it away. We painted the walls a soft butter yellow, Mom's favorite color. We hung cheerful curtains and put photos of Emma and baby Tommy on the dresser. We made it as welcoming as we could. Matthew didn't help. He worked late every night that week. When he came home, he'd peek into the room, nod, and disappear into his study. He never once asked if I needed help moving furniture or if Mom needed anything. Emma noticed, but she didn't say anything. What was there to say? The day Mom moved in, I felt like the house took its first real breath in years. She came through the door in her favorite purple cardigan, clutching her purse and looking around nervously. It's beautiful, Ashley, she said, her eyes shiny with tears. But are you sure I don't want to be a burden on you and Matthew? You could never be a burden, Mom. I hugged her tight. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Matthew appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes. He gave Mom a polite smile and a brief hug. Welcome, Michelle. I hope you'll be comfortable here. His voice was cordial, pleasant even, but something about it felt rehearsed, like he was playing the role of welcoming son-in-law without actually feeling it. Still, those first few weeks were beautiful, better than I'd dared to hope. Mom and I fell into an easy routine. I'd make breakfast for both of us, scrambled eggs and toast, her favorite. We'd do the crossword puzzle from the newspaper together, her reading the clues while I filled in the answers. We'd watch old black and white movies in the afternoon, the ones she'd loved when she was young. She'd tell me stories about her childhood in Savannah, about my grandparents, about the mischief she'd gotten into as a girl. I'd heard these stories 100 times before, but I never got tired of them. Matthew would come home around 6, ask politely how our day was, and we'd all have dinner together. He'd tell us about his work, some project he was managing, some meeting he'd had. Mom would listen and nod and ask simple questions. Everything felt normal, peaceful, like we'd found a new rhythm as a 3-person household. For those first weeks, I actually believed we'd done the right thing. I believed we'd found a way to make this work. I believed Matthew would adjust, that maybe having Mom here would even be good for him, give him someone else to focus on besides his own grief. I was so naive. The change started in early January, right after New Year's. At first it was subtle, so subtle I almost missed it. Mom started eating less. I'd make her favorite meals, pot roast mashed potatoes, her beloved apple pie, and she'd push the food around her plate, barely taking a few bites. Over the course of 3 weeks, I watched her clothes start to hang loose on her small frame. "Mom, you need to eat," I'd say, concerned. "You're losing weight." "I'm just not very hungry, dear," she'd reply, not meeting my eyes. "I think it's my medication. Sometimes it upsets my stomach." But it wasn't just the loss of appetite. She seemed diminished somehow. During the day when it was just the two of us, she was still herself, chatty, engaged, telling her stories. She'd laugh at jokes on TV. She'd hum while we did the dishes. She was present. But the moment we heard Matthew's car in the driveway around 6 o'clock, I'd watch something happen to her. It was like a light switch flipping off inside her. Her shoulders would hunch forward slightly. Her hands, which had been gesturing as she talked, would fold quietly in her lap. Her voice would drop almost to a whisper. At the dinner table, she barely spoke. Her eyes would track Matthew's every movement, watching him cut his chicken, watching him reach for the salt, watching him lean back in his chair. It wasn't the look of someone engaged in conversation. It was a watchful look, wary, the way a small animal watches a predator in the yard, aware of every step, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. At first, I made excuses, 1,000 of them. "It's just Matthew's stress from work," I'd tell myself. "He's got that big merger project. He's tired. He just doesn't know how to handle dementia. It makes him uncomfortable. He's awkward around her. It's hard for him to see someone else in Daniel's room. It brings back painful memories." I wanted to believe anything other than the ugly truth that was starting to form in the corner of my mind. But then came the night that I couldn't ignore anymore. It was late January, and Matthew had a business dinner in the city, so it would just be Mom and me for the evening. I made her favorite roasted chicken with herbs and buttery potatoes. I set the table with the good china and lit a candle. And Mom ate. She ate with an appetite I hadn't seen in weeks. She had seconds. She even told a joke that made me laugh out loud. "Why did the Scarecrow win an award?" she asked with a mischievous smile. "I don't know why. Because he was outstanding in his field." It was such a dad joke, such a mom joke, that I laughed until my sides hurt. And seeing her smile, really smile, made my heart feel light for the first time in weeks. Later, we sat in the living room watching some random show on TV. She was curled up on the sofa under a blanket, looking so small. Out of nowhere, she reached for my hand. Her skin was thin as paper and cold. "Ashley, honey," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Does he like me being here?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Of course he does, Mom." I squeezed her hand, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Why would you even ask that?" She looked down at her own hands in her lap, not answering for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean in to hear her. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the way. Like I'm ruining your lives together. Like he wishes I wasn't here." "Never," I said firmly, even as something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. "Don't you ever think that. You are not in the way. This is your home. We love you." I hugged her tight, feeling her frail bones under her pajamas, and she seemed to settle down. But her question planted a cold seed of doubt in my chest. A seed that started to sprout on a lazy Saturday afternoon 2 weeks later. It was early February, one of those gray winter Saturdays where the sky is the color of old dishwater and there's a chill that seeps into your bones no matter how high you turn up the heat. Mom and I were on the sofa in the living room. I was reading a novel I'd been trying to finish for weeks, and she was knitting or trying to. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and the blue scarf she was working on was coming out crooked and full of holes. But she was determined. At one point, a ball of yarn rolled off her lap and onto the floor. She leaned forward to pick it up, and as she did, the sleeve of her blue wool cardigan rode up just a little bit, exposing her forearm. And that's when I saw it. My blood ran cold. There on her pale, thin skin was an ugly bruise. Not a small one, it was large, spreading across her forearm in mottled shades of purple and yellow-green. But it wasn't just the size that made my stomach drop. Right in the center of the bruise was a darker mark. Round, distinct, the exact size and shape of a thumbprint. I put my book down, my hands suddenly shaking. My voice came out strangled. "Mom, what's that on your arm?" She followed my gaze, and I watched her face change. Her eyes went wide, not with confusion, but with something that looked like fear. Instantly, she yanked her sleeve down, covering the mark. "Oh, that!" Her voice was too high, too rushed. "It's nothing. I bumped it on the closet door. You know how clumsy I am. I was reaching for my coat and just bumped right into the edge." But she wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the wall across from us, staring at the texture of the paint, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. I'd seen my mother bump into furniture 1,000 times in my life. I'd seen her scrape her shin on a coffee table, knock her elbow on a door frame, bruise her hip on a kitchen counter. Those injuries looked like bumps and scrapes, irregular shapes, maybe a little swelling. This was different. This wasn't the result of bumping into something. This was the mark of a hand, the mark of fingers gripping, the mark of force. I sat there, my heart hammering in my ears, the book forgotten in my lap. "You bumped it on the door," I repeated flatly, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at that wall, her fingers clutching the edge of her sleeve to make absolutely sure her arm stayed covered. In that moment, staring at the sleeve of that blue cardigan hiding that awful mark, I knew. I didn't know how or why. I didn't even want to imagine it. But somewhere deep in my gut, I knew. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And I had to talk to Matthew. I waited until that night after Mom had gone to bed. I couldn't talk to Matthew in front of her. I didn't want to upset her, and I needed to see his reaction without an audience. Dinner had been nearly silent, the tension so thick I swear the pot roast on my plate tasted like sawdust. Matthew talked about some round of golf he'd played that afternoon, about a deal he was working on. I nodded and made appropriate noises, but my brain was elsewhere, rehearsing what I was going to say. Around 9 o'clock, I helped Mom get ready for bed. As I pulled the covers up and tucked her in, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Lock the door, Ashley," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. I froze. "What, why, Mom? Just please lock it." The request sent ice through my veins. "No one's going to come in here, Mom. You're safe. Please." Her voice was so small, so frightened that I almost did it. But I knew if I locked her door, Matthew would notice. He'd ask questions. And I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, not until I understood what was happening. "Okay, Mom, I will." It was a lie, but it seemed to calm her. I closed her door, but didn't lock it. Then I went downstairs where Matthew was on the couch watching a basketball game, the sound filling the empty house. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't want, and waited. A few minutes later, he came in yawning. "Boring game. Think I'm going to turn in." "Matthew, wait." My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. "We need to talk." He stopped, leaning against the doorframe. There was no concern in his expression, just mild annoyance at being delayed from whatever he'd planned to do. "This late, is something wrong?" "Yes, something's wrong." I set my glass down on the counter with a dull thud, needing something to do with my hands. "I saw a mark on my mother's arm today. A bad bruise." He frowned, a picture of puzzled concern. "A bruise where?" "On her forearm. And Matthew, it wasn't just any bruise." I made myself look directly at him. It looked like someone grabbed her, like a grip mark. I could see the thumbprint. For just a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it, something flickered across his face. But then he laughed. Not a real laugh, but a puff of air through his nose, dismissive and irritated. "Oh, for God's sake, Ashley." He walked over to the sink, getting himself a glass of water, as if we were talking about something as mundane as the weather. "She's old. Old people bruise like paper. You know that. Their skin is so thin you can practically see through it. She probably doesn't even remember how she got it." The words were logical, reasonable, the exact words I had dreaded hearing. She said she bumped it on the closet door. I said, but Matthew, she was scared, and the mark doesn't look like a bump from a door. It looks... That's when his tone shifted. The fake patience vanished, replaced by sharp irritation. And what are you implying exactly? He turned to face me, and there was something hard in his eyes. That someone hurt her, that I did it. Is that what you're saying, Ashley? After 30 years of marriage, you think I would hurt your mother? He had a way of doing this, of turning things around, of making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the problem. I felt myself start to back down, to second-guess everything I'd seen. I'm not implying anything, I said, though it was a lie. I'm just worried, and she's been acting scared around you. Scared. He cut me off, his voice rising slightly. She has dementia, Ashley. Her moods swing wildly. One minute she's laughing because she can't remember what day it is, the next she's crying because she thinks her mother's coming to visit. You're being overprotective and paranoid. He drank his water in one long gulp and slammed the glass into the sink hard enough to make me flinch. Is this what it's going to be like now? Every little scrape, every little purple spot is going to turn into an investigation. I warned you this would change our lives, Ashley. I told you having her here would be difficult. But I didn't think you'd start accusing me of abuse just because an old woman bruises easily. Matthew, I'm not accusing. I'm going to bed. He pushed past me, his shoulder brushing mine hard enough to make me stumble slightly. And I suggest you stop looking for trouble where there isn't any. He walked out, leaving me standing alone under the harsh fluorescent kitchen lights. I felt small, stupid. Was he right? Was I being paranoid? My mother did bruise easily. She did have dementia. Maybe I was seeing monsters in shadows because I was stressed and worried and grief-stricken over my son and my failing marriage. I went to bed that night feeling guilty and confused, lying next to my husband, and feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. But the seed of suspicion once planted doesn't die easily. And in the weeks that followed, it only grew. The bruise on Mom's arm faded slowly over the next week, going from purple to green to yellow before finally disappearing. But Mom herself didn't fade back to normal. If anything, she got worse. She started essentially exiling herself to her room whenever Matthew was home. She'd eat breakfast and lunch with me, chatty and engaged. But the moment we heard his car in the driveway at 6 o'clock, she'd vanish. I'd bring her dinner up on a tray, and she'd only come back downstairs after she heard his study door close for the night. One evening, I knocked on her door around 7:30. Mom, don't you want to come watch TV with us? There was a long pause before she answered. I'm tired, honey. I think I'll just stay up here and rest. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I didn't hear the sounds of someone resting. I heard the soft murmur of her television turned down low, an occasional movement, the creak of her bed as she shifted position, restless and wakeful. And then the bruises started appearing again. The second one I noticed was on her wrist, half hidden under the sleeve of her long-sleeved blouse. I only saw it when I was helping her change for bed, and she pulled her arm back so quickly I almost didn't register what I'd seen. Mom, wait. It's nothing, Ashley. She yanked her sleeve down. I'm just clumsy. You know that. But I'd seen it. Another purple mark smaller than the first, but unmistakable. The third bruise I saw completely by accident. Mom was reaching for something in the kitchen and she bent forward slightly. The collar of her shirt gaped open, and there on her collarbone was an angry red-purple blotch about the size of a quarter. Mom, I don't remember, dear. She straightened up quickly, adjusting her collar. It's nothing. But her eyes said everything her words didn't. They said, please don't ask. Please don't make me talk about this. I was losing my mind. I knew I wasn't imagining these marks. I knew they couldn't all be from clumsiness. But every time I tried to bring it up with Mom, she'd shut down. And I couldn't bring it up with Matthew again, not after how he'd reacted the first time. So I watched, and waited, and paid attention to things I'd been missing before, like how Mom was always more tired in the mornings, always more confused, more withdrawn, more frightened after a night's sleep. The marks never appeared during the day when I was with her. They never showed up during dinner when all three of us were together. They appeared overnight when the house was dark and quiet and I was asleep. The realization came to me slowly, like a horrible picture developing in a dark room. Something was happening at night, when I was asleep, when the only person awake and moving through the house was my husband. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-February. I'd been upstairs organizing the linen closet, one of those mindless tasks you do when you need to keep your hands busy and your mind off things you don't want to think about. I was coming back down the stairs, a stack of old towels in my arms, when I heard voices from the kitchen. Matthew's voice, and Mom's. I stopped halfway down the staircase, hidden from view by the wall. Matthew had come home early. His car must have been so quiet I hadn't heard it. And now he was in the kitchen with my mother, and his voice. His voice was different. It was low and sharp, with an edge to it I'd never heard before. It was the tone of voice you'd use to scold a misbehaving dog. Cold, controlled, cruel. I couldn't make out the words he was speaking too quietly, but I heard the tone. And I heard my mother's response, a weak, almost inaudible murmur. My heart started pounding. I took a step down, making the staircase creak. Instantly, Matthew's voice changed, like someone had flipped a switch. "Oh, there it is, Michelle." His voice was suddenly loud, warm, cheerful. "I was just helping your mom find the sugar, honey." I came around the corner into the kitchen. Matthew was standing by the counter holding the sugar bowl, a smile on his face that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. Mom was on the other side of the room, hunched over her hands, gripping the edge of the counter as if she needed it for support. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She looked like a child who'd been caught doing something wrong and was waiting for punishment. "Found it," Matthew said brightly, setting the sugar bowl down. He crossed to me and kissed my forehead. His lips felt cold. "Long day. I'm going to go take a shower before dinner." He walked past me and up the stairs, whistling. I stood there in the kitchen, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, and I couldn't move. That fake cheerfulness. That sudden switch from the cold, cruel voice I'd heard to the bright, normal husband voice. It was like watching an actor's mask slip for just a split second, revealing the monster underneath. And that's when another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Mom was always worse in the mornings, more tired, more scared, more confused. I'd been noticing it for weeks but hadn't connected the dots. The bruises appeared overnight. The fear was worst first thing in the morning. Something was happening during the night, when I was asleep, when only one person was awake and moving through this house. The truth was so horrific my mind tried to reject it, but I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't unhear what I'd heard. My husband, the man I'd loved for 30 years, the man who'd held me through Daniel's death, the man I'd built a life with, was hurting my mother, at night, in secret, while I slept. That Wednesday night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I lay in bed next to Matthew, my body rigid as a board, listening to his breathing slow and deepen into sleep. The darkness pressed down on me like a physical weight. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows, every distant sound made my heart race. My mind kept replaying the scene in the kitchen, the cold cruelty in his voice when he'd been alone with Mom, the instant transformation when he knew I was there, the switch from monster to loving husband so smooth and practiced, it made my skin crawl. How long had he been doing this? How many nights had I slept peacefully while he terrorized my mother just down the hall? I thought about our 30 years together. Our wedding day when he'd cried during his vows. The birth of our children when he'd held each baby with such tenderness. The way he'd built Emma's treehouse with his own hands, spending every weekend for a month to make it perfect. The candlelit dinner he'd surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. Had that man ever really existed? Or had I been sleeping next to a stranger all along? Around 3 a.m, lying there in the dark with Matthew's form beside me, a thought crystallized in my mind with perfect, terrifying clarity. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Because if I confronted him again without it, he'd gaslight me. He'd make me doubt myself. He'd convince me I was paranoid, hysterical, losing my mind. And maybe in my grief and exhaustion and confusion, I'd believe him. But if I had proof, real objective proof, then I'd know. I'd know I wasn't crazy. I'd know what I suspected was real. And then I could protect my mother the way she'd always protected me. The idea came to me suddenly, fully formed a camera. A hidden camera. My heart started pounding so hard I was afraid it would wake Matthew. A camera in Mom's room, recording what happened in the dark hours of the night when I was asleep. The thought felt both brilliant and like a horrible betrayal. To spy on my own husband. To plant a secret device in my own home in my mother's bedroom. It was the kind of thing you saw in movies, not something a retired history teacher from Decatur, Georgia would ever do. But then I thought of the bruise shaped like a thumbprint, the fear in Mom's eyes, her whispered plea to lock the door. And I knew that the risk of being wrong was a luxury I could no longer afford. My mother's safety was worth more than my marriage. It was worth more than the fragile peace we'd been pretending to keep in this house. I would do it. I would install a camera, and I would find out the truth. The next morning, I waited until Matthew left for work. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug I didn't drink from, watching the clock, until I heard his car pull out of the driveway at exactly 8 o'clock, like always. The moment the sound of his engine faded, I went to my laptop. My hands shook as I typed hidden spy cameras into the search bar. Hundreds of results popped up. Apparently, I wasn't the first person who needed to secretly record something in their own home. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it made me feel sick. I scrolled through pages of options, my stomach churning. I needed something small enough to hide, something with night vision that could record in the dark, something with motion detection so I wouldn't have to wade through hours of footage, and most importantly, something that wouldn't be noticed. After an hour of research that felt like falling down a rabbit hole, I found what I was looking for, a camera disguised as a USB phone charger. It was small, barely bigger than a normal wall charger. It had infrared night vision. It recorded to a micro SD card when it detected motion, and it cost $180. $180, the price of truth, but I couldn't use our joint credit card. Matthew checked our statements, regularly managed our finances. He'd see the charge, ask questions. I couldn't risk it. I grabbed my purse and drove to our bank. The teller, a young woman named Jessica, who'd helped us dozens of times, smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Williams, how are you today?" "Fine, thank you." I slid my withdrawal slip across the counter. "I need to withdraw $200 in cash from my personal account, please." She processed it without question, counting out the bills with practiced efficiency. But as she handed them to me, she tilted her head. "Cash withdrawal. That's unusual for you. Everything okay?" "Oh, yes." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. There's a garage sale this weekend. Thought I'd bring cash for it." The lie came so easily it scared me. I drove 45 minutes to an electronics store on the other side of town, in a strip mall I'd never been to before. I needed to go somewhere no one would recognize me, where I could buy what I needed anonymously. The store was one of those discount places with fluorescent lights that buzzed and aisles crammed with cheap gadgets. I found the security camera section and located the model I'd researched. There were 3 left on the shelf. I grabbed one and took it to the counter. The teenager working the register barely looked at me. He had earbuds in and was scrolling on his phone between customers. He scanned the box I paid in cash, and he shoved the receipt in the bag toward me without a word. To him, I was just another old lady buying some random gadget. He had no idea I was buying evidence. He had no idea I was buying a weapon to use against my own husband. The small box sat in my purse all day like it weighed 100 pounds. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Mom and I went through our normal routine breakfast, the crossword puzzle, watching an old Cary Grant movie, but I was somewhere else entirely. My mind was on that box, on what I was planning to do on the point of no return I was about to cross. That evening, I made meatloaf for dinner. Matthew came home right at 6, like clockwork. We ate together, the 3 of us making stiff conversation about nothing. Matthew talked about some project at work. I nodded and made appropriate sounds. Mom ate 3 bites and pushed the rest around her plate. After dinner, Matthew went to watch television in the living room. I cleaned up the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped a plate. When I finished, I found Mom in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out too bright, too false. "I need to straighten up your bookshelf. Some of those books are getting dusty." She started to stand. "Let me help you, dear." No. I gently pressed her shoulder, guiding her back down. "You rest. I'll just be a minute." She settled back with a confused look, but didn't argue. I turned to the bookshelf, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The bookshelf was dark wood, about 6 feet tall, positioned directly across from Mom's bed. It was filled with old hardcover books I'd brought down from the attic family photo albums and framed pictures. The perfect place. My hands trembled as I reached for the photo in the center of the middle shelf. It was a picture of the 3 of us, me, Matthew, and Daniel, taken at a church picnic about 10 years ago, before the cancer, before the death, before everything fell apart. We were all smiling, the Georgia sun bright on our faces, a perfect family moment, frozen in time. A framed lie. I pulled the camera from my pocket. I'd already taken it out of the box earlier and hidden it in my cardigan. It was surprisingly small and light. The lens was tiny, barely noticeable. I positioned it carefully behind the picture frame, angling it just right so the lens peeked through a small gap between the frame and the photo. From where I stood, I could barely see it. From Mom's bed, it would be completely invisible. My fingers fumbled as I ran the power cord down behind the books and plugged it into the power strip hidden behind the shelf. The camera had an internal memory card, but it also needed to stay plugged in for continuous power. I pressed the tiny power button. A small blue light blinked once, then went dark. According to the instructions I'd read obsessively that afternoon, that meant it was armed and ready. Motion activated. Recording in night vision mode. I stood there for a moment, staring at the innocent-looking bookshelf that now held my secret weapon. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I had just turned my mother's bedroom into a potential crime scene. I felt dirty, like a spy, like someone who violated trust and privacy. But then I turned and looked at Mom sitting on her bed in her soft pink pajamas, so small and fragile and vulnerable. And I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't violating privacy. I was protecting her. I was her only defender, her only hope. "All done, Mom," I managed to smile. "The books look much better now." She smiled back, trusting and innocent. "You're such a good daughter, Ashley. Always taking care of me." I kissed her forehead, breathing in her lavender soap smell. "I love you, Mom. Sleep well, okay?" "I love you too, sweetheart." I left her room and closed the door gently behind me. Then I stood in the hallway for a long moment, one hand against the wall trying to steady myself. There was no turning back now. I went to bed that night at 10:30, same as always. Matthew was already there, reading something on his tablet. I changed into my pajamas in the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and climbed under the covers beside him. "Night," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Night," I replied. He turned off his tablet and his bedside lamp. I turned off mine. The room fell into darkness. And I lay there, every nerve ending on high alert, pretending to sleep. I tried to keep my breathing even and slow the way it would be if I were actually asleep. I kept my body relaxed even though every muscle wanted to tense. I listened to Matthew's breathing gradually slow and deepen beside me. 10 o'clock became 11. 11 became midnight. I was starting to think nothing would happen. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I was paranoid after all. Maybe I just wasted $180 and violated my own ethics for nothing. But then at 12:47 in the morning, I heard it. The soft creak of the floorboard right outside our bedroom door. My heart stopped. I didn't dare breathe. I kept my eyes closed, kept my body perfectly still. The sound came again. Matthew's weight shifting. He was getting out of bed. I felt the mattress dip and rise as he moved, heard the whisper of his feet on the carpet, the nearly silent click of our bedroom doorknob turning. He was leaving our room. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to sit up, to demand to know where he was going. But I forced myself to stay still, to keep breathing slowly, to pretend I was fast asleep. I heard our bedroom door close with the softest click. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, I heard another sound that turned my blood to ice. The sound of Mom's bedroom door opening. Down the hall, in the darkness, my husband was entering my mother's room. I lay there in the pitch black, paralyzed, my heart pounding so violently I was sure it could be heard through the walls. I didn't know what was happening in that room. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything but the roar of blood in my ears. But I knew with soul-crushing certainty that the camera was recording everything. Time became meaningless. I don't know if he was in there for 10 minutes or 30. It felt like hours. Every second was an agony of not knowing, of imagining, of wanting to burst out of bed and run down the hall, but being frozen by fear and the knowledge that I needed this evidence. Finally, I heard Mom's door open again, close again. Footsteps in the hallway, soft and careful. Our bedroom door opened. The mattress dipped as Matthew climbed back into bed. He settled beside me, and I felt the warmth of his body just inches from mine. The same body that had just come from terrorizing my mother. I had never felt so cold in my entire life. I lay there for what remained of the night, my back to him, my whole body tense, and I didn't sleep at all. The alarm went off at 6:30 like always. Matthew stretched, yawned, and leaned over to kiss my cheek. "Morning, honey," he said, his voice rough with sleep. The touch of his lips on my skin felt like ice. I forced myself to smile. "Morning." We went through our normal routine like actors in a play. He showered. I went downstairs and made coffee. The smell of it made my stomach turn, but I poured him a cup anyway, added the cream and sugar he liked, and had it waiting when he came down in his work clothes. "Heading out early today," he said, taking the mug from my hand. "Got an 8:30 meeting with the regional director." "Okay." My voice sounded normal, steady. Amazing what you could do when you had to. "Drive safe." He kissed me again, another cold press of lips, and left. I stood at the kitchen window watching his silver sedan back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Only when I was absolutely certain he was gone did I let myself collapse against the counter, my legs suddenly weak. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the granite to keep myself upright. I took one deep breath, then another, then a third. "You can do this, Ashley," I whispered to myself. "You have to know." I scribbled a quick note for Mom, "Running errands, be back soon," and left it on the kitchen table. Then I climbed the stairs on trembling legs. I slipped into Mom's room. She was still sleeping, her breathing heavy and troubled. I went straight to the bookshelf, moved the picture frame, and with fingers that felt numb and clumsy, removed the tiny SD card from the camera. I held it in the palm of my hand, a minuscule piece of black plastic. Pandora's box. Once I looked at what was on this card, I couldn't unsee it. Everything would change. But I'd already made my choice. I went to my small home office, closed and locked the door, and inserted the card into my laptop. The file folder opened. There was one video file time-stamped 12:47 a.m. My cursor hovered over it. My hand on the mouse was shaking so badly the cursor danced across the screen. I double-clicked. The video player opened and my screen filled with the grainy, greenish black and white image of Mom's room in night vision. It looked ghostly unreal, like footage from a horror movie. I could see the bed, Mom's small form under the covers. The door was in the top left corner of the frame. For a moment, nothing happened, just the quiet sound of her breathing, slightly raspy through the laptop speakers. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, silently. The door opened and Matthew's silhouette filled the frame. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might be sick. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. Stood there for a second, just looking at the bed. Then he moved closer, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He leaned over her and shook her shoulder. Not gently, it was a rough, violent jolt. "Michelle, wake up." His voice on the recording was a whisper, but it was a harsh whisper full of venom. Mom stirred, startled, and tried to sit up. Her voice was confused, frightened. "Matthew, what is it? Lie down." He snarled the words, and he shoved her back against the pillows. Her frail body gave no resistance at all. I watched frozen in horror as my husband, the man I'd slept beside for 30 years, began to speak to my mother in a voice I'd never heard before, a voice dripping with cruelty and contempt. "You think this is a hotel?" he hissed. "You think you can just come here and ruin my life, ruin my peace? I have no quiet in this house anymore because of you. No peace, no privacy, nothing." Mom started to cry. Silent, choked sobs that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "You're a burden, Michelle." He continued, his voice cold and precise as a knife. "A useless, pathetic burden. Ashley doesn't see it. She's blind, but I see it. I see you sucking the life out of us. Our money, our time, our happiness, everything." I had my hand clamped over my mouth, trying not to make a sound, but tears were streaming down my face. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the man I'd married. The man who'd held me when our son died. The man who'd promised to love and cherish me. Then he did something that made all the air leave my lungs. He leaned down and grabbed Mom's forearm, the same arm where I'd seen the bruise. His hand wrapped around it, his thumb pressing into her thin skin. He pulled her up slightly in the bed, bringing his face close to hers. The camera captured it all with terrible crystal clarity. "You are not going to say a word about this to Ashley," he said, each word deliberate and threatening. "Not one word. If you do, I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find. A place where no one will visit you. Where you will rot alone. Do you understand me?" Mom, sobbing and shaking, nodded her head. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." "Good." He shoved her back down onto the bed. Hard. Her head hit the headboard with a dull thud that made me flinch. He straightened up, looked down at her for one more second with pure contempt on his face, and walked out of the room as quietly as he'd entered. The video continued for a few more minutes, showing nothing but my mother lying alone in the dark, crying. soft broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. I slammed the laptop shut. The shock hit me like a physical wave. My whole body started to shake, a coldness that came from the inside out, spreading through my veins like ice water. I lunged out of my chair and ran to the bathroom. I fell to my knees in front of the toilet and wrenched my body trying to purge the horror of what I'd just witnessed. Nothing came up but bile burning my throat. I knelt there on the cold tile floor, trembling and crying, and the tears that came weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. Pure burning white-hot rage. It was worse than anything I could have imagined. Not stress, not impatience, not even simple cruelty. It was calculated, sadistic, evil, and it had been happening for weeks, maybe months, right under my nose. While I slept peacefully in our bed, my husband was down the hall terrorizing my sick elderly mother. The image of her terrified face was seared into my brain. The sound of his venomous voice echoed in my ears. The sight of his hand gripping her arm, leaving that thumbprint bruise I'd seen. I stood up on shaking legs and went to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror. My face was blotchy and swollen, my eyes red and wild. But there was something new there, too, something hard and determined like steel. The pain in my chest was still there, the pain of betrayal of a 30-year marriage turning to ash before my eyes. But on top of it, something stronger was growing. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry in front of him and give him the chance to gaslight me one more time. No, I was going to be as cold and as calculated as he was. I was going to build a case, piece by piece, video by video. I was going to build his cage. I put the memory card back in the camera that same morning, my hands steadier now that I had a plan. Tonight it would record again, and the night after that, and the one after that. I wasn't just going to prove what he was doing. I was going to document a pattern, build an unassailable case. He thought he had all the power hidden in the darkness. He had no idea the darkness now had eyes. From that day on, my life became a stage play, and I was the lead actress in a performance about a happy marriage. The script was simple: smile, be pleasant, pretend everything is fine. But behind the curtain in the backstage of my mind, I was building something. The second night's recording was almost identical to the first. Matthew entered Mom's room at 12:51 a.m. The same cruel words, the same threats. This time he didn't touch her, but he stood over her bed and told her she was starting to smell old, that the whole house stank because of her. I saved the video in a password-protected folder on my computer. I named the folder Evidence. The third night he came in and saw a glass of water on her nightstand. He picked it up and threw it against the wall. The sound of the glass shattering on the video made me jump. Mom let out a small, terrified cry. "Learn to clean up after yourself, you useless old woman," he snarled before walking out. In the morning when I went to wake Mom, I found the broken glass on the carpet. "Oh my God, Mom, what happened?" I asked, feigning surprise even though I already knew. She shook her head, trembling. I must have knocked it over in the night." I cleaned up the shards of glass, each piece, feeling like a stab in my own heart. The fourth night, he pinched her. On the video, I watched his hand dart out like a snake, squeezing the skin on her upper arm viciously. She whimpered in pain. The next morning, there was a new purple mark exactly where I'd seen him grab her. And then came the fifth night. The night that changed everything. I watched the fifth night's recording with my heart in my throat. Matthew entered Mom's room like always at 12:53 a.m., but this time he had something in his hand. 2 small white pills. He shook Mom awake roughly. She stirred groggy and disoriented. What is that?" she mumbled, squinting at his hand. "Your sleeping medicine," he said, his voice falsely calm. But Ashley already gave me my medicine before bed." The false calm vanished instantly. His voice turned sharp and threatening. "You'll take what I give you. Open your mouth." She hesitated, turning her face away. He grabbed her by the chin, forcing her head back against the pillow. "I said open your mouth." With his other hand, he shoved the 2 pills into her mouth. I could see her body flinch, gagging. He grabbed the water glass from her nightstand and forced it to her lips. "Swallow. All of it." She swallowed, coughing and sputtering. He let go of her roughly. "That'll keep you quiet," he said, "so you don't cause me any trouble." Then he left, closing the door behind him. I sat frozen in front of my laptop screen, my mind racing. What were those pills? Were they sleeping pills or something else? Suddenly everything made sense. Mom's grogginess in the mornings, her confusion, the fact that she sometimes could barely get out of bed for breakfast. I'd attributed it to her dementia getting worse, but it wasn't that at all. He was drugging her. He was keeping her sedated so she'd be docile during the day. Less of a problem. Less likely to tell me what was happening. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was dangerous. He could overdose her. He could kill her. My hands were shaking as I saved the video. That was it. That was the last piece I needed. I couldn't do this alone anymore. Collecting videos wasn't enough. This had gone beyond my ability to handle. This wasn't a marriage problem. This was a crime. A crime happening every night just feet from where I slept. I had to get help. Real help. I picked up my phone and searched for family law attorneys in Atlanta. The first name that came up had excellent reviews, Sarah Johnson Johnson Law Offices. I dialed the number, my heart pounding. A professional voice answered. Johnson Law Offices, how may I help you? My voice came out steady, clear, determined. My name is Ashley Williams. I need to make an urgent appointment with Ms. Johnson. It's about my mother and my husband. Of course, Mrs. Williams. We have an opening tomorrow morning at 10. Does that work? Yes, thank you. I'll be there. I hung up and sat back in my chair. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I'd stop being a detective and become something else. A warrior. Sarah Johnson's office was in downtown Atlanta in one of those tall glass buildings that reflected the morning sun like a mirror. I told Matthew I was meeting an old friend from my teaching days for coffee. The lie came easily now I was getting good at pretending. I wore my navy blue suit, the one I used to wear for parent-teacher conferences when I needed to project authority. I needed to feel strong today. In control. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like it took forever. My stomach was in knots. I was carrying 5 memory cards in a small plastic case in my purse, each one labeled with a date. 5 nights of horror distilled onto tiny pieces of plastic. The reception area was tastefully decorated cream-colored walls, comfortable leather chairs, a view of the city that took my breath away. A young woman behind the desk smiled at me. Mrs. Williams, Ms. Johnson is ready for you. Right this way. She led me down a hallway and into a corner office. Sarah Johnson stood up from behind her desk as I entered. She was a woman in her early 40s, African-American with intelligent dark eyes and an air of competence that radiated from her like heat. Mrs. Williams. She extended her hand and her grip was firm and warm. Please have a seat. My assistant said this was urgent. How can I help you? I sat down in one of the chairs across from her desk. For a moment the words wouldn't come. Now that I was here about to air out the darkest secrets of my life to a complete stranger, the weight of it all hit me. But then I thought of Mom's face on that video. The fear, the tears, the way she'd flinched when Matthew grabbed her. And I started talking. I told her everything. About Daniel's death 7 years ago and how it had changed Matthew. About Mom's dementia and her moving in with us. About the bruises I'd noticed, the fear in Mom's eyes, the way she hid in her room whenever Matthew was home. I told her about my confrontation with Matthew and how he'd made me feel crazy, paranoid, hysterical. I told her about the camera, the 5 nights of recordings, what I'd seen and heard. My voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. I felt ashamed somehow, as if the failure of my marriage and the abuse happening in my home were my fault. As if I should have known, should have seen it sooner, should have done something to prevent it. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. Her expression remained neutral and professional, but I could see something shifting in her eyes as I talked, a sharpening of focus, a tightening of her jaw. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. Ashley, she said, her tone calm and steady. Do you have proof, anything beyond your observations and suspicions? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I opened my purse and took out the small plastic case containing the 5 memory cards. I placed it on her polished desk between us. Yes, I said, and my voice was stronger now. I have 5 nights of recordings. Her expression changed. The professional neutrality was replaced by something else, an intense seriousness that made me sit up straighter. You installed a camera? She asked. Yes, in my mother's room, with night vision. He doesn't know. She pulled a laptop from her desk drawer and opened it. May I? I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. Sarah inserted the first memory card, the one from the first night, the one with the explicit threat. The video began to play on her laptop screen. I'd watched this video multiple times already, but seeing it again, watching Sarah watch it, made my stomach clench all over again. The grainy night vision footage. Mom sleeping peacefully. Then Matthew's silhouette entering the room. I watched Sarah's face as the video played. At first, her expression remained controlled, professional. But as Matthew's voice came through the speakers, "You think you can just come here and ruin my life?" I saw her lips press into a thin line. When he grabbed Mom's chin and threatened her, "I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find." A flash of pure anger crossed Sarah's face. She watched the entire video in silence. When it ended, she removed the memory card and inserted the last one, the one with the pills. She watched as Matthew forced the medication down Mom's throat. Watched as he grabbed her by the chin, shoving the pills into her mouth while she gagged and cried. Watched as he threatened her one more time before leaving her alone in the dark. When the video ended, Sarah slowly closed her laptop. The silence in the office was heavy. Finally, she looked up at me, and her voice was ice cold with controlled fury. "Ashley," she said, "what your husband is doing isn't just a marital issue. This has a name. It's called elder abuse, and it's a felony." Hearing those words from a legal professional, someone who knew the law, who'd seen cases like this before, validated everything. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't paranoid. It was real, and it was criminal. "Coercion, battery, unlawful administration of medication," Sarah continued. "We're talking about multiple criminal charges here." My hands were shaking. What do I do now? Do I go to the police?" Sarah leaned forward, her expression shifting into strategy mode. "Not yet. The videos are powerful evidence, but his defense will try to discredit them. They'll claim you doctored them, that they're taken out of context. They'll say he was just giving prescribed medication that you didn't know about." "But we need one more piece," she said firmly. "The most important piece. We need an official medical report documenting the injuries, and if possible, we need your mother's testimony." My heart sank. "But she's so scared. She lies to me to protect him, or maybe to protect herself. She won't talk." "She'll talk to the right person in the right setting." Sarah's voice was confident. "She needs to feel completely safe, and we need a medical professional to document everything, the injuries, her state of mind, her testimony. Do you trust her family doctor?" "Dr. Hayes," I said immediately. "He's been her doctor for over 20 years. He delivered Emma. He was there when Daniel was sick. He's a good man." "Perfect." Sarah opened a notepad and started writing. "Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call Dr. Hayes' office. Tell them your mother had a small fall and you want him to check her over as a precaution. Okay? Once you're in the exam room alone with him and your mother, you tell him everything. Everything you told me. And then you let Dr. Hayes do his job. He'll examine her, document every bruise, every mark. He'll talk to her. In a medical setting away from your husband with you by her side, she might feel safe enough to tell the truth." Sarah looked at me intently. "And if she does, Dr. Hayes' report becomes our cornerstone. Medical evidence that corroborates your videos. Once we have that, we go to the police." I left her office an hour later with a plan. A clear, actionable plan. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. A professional who believed me and knew how to fight. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear and despair. I felt hope. The next morning after Matthew left for work, I called Dr. Hayes' office. "Decatur Family Medicine, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hi, Jennifer. This is Ashley Williams. I need to make an appointment for my mother, Michelle Porter, as soon as possible." "Of course, is everything all right?" I forced my voice to stay calm. "She had a small stumble yesterday. Nothing serious, but I'd like Dr. Hayes to look her over, just to be safe. Let me check his schedule. We have an opening at 10:30 this morning. Would that work?" "Perfect. Thank you so much." I hung up and went to find Mom. She was in her room, sitting in the armchair by the window, staring out at the bare trees in our backyard. "Mom, we're going to see Dr. Hayes this morning." She turned to me, and I saw fear flash across her face. "Why, I'm fine, Ashley. I don't need a doctor." "I know you feel fine, Mom." I sat down on the edge of her bed, keeping my voice gentle. "But I want him to check your blood pressure, make sure everything's okay. Please just do this for me." She studied my face for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that she knew or sensed that this wasn't just a routine checkup, that something bigger was happening. Finally, she sighed. "All right, dear, if you insist." The drive to Dr. Hayes's office was silent. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, running through what I was going to say, how I was going to explain it. Mom sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. The clinic was familiar. I'd been bringing family members here for decades. The same beige waiting room with its magazines and children's toys. The same antiseptic smell. The same soft music playing from hidden speakers. Jennifer checked us in, and a nurse led us back to an exam room almost immediately. She took Mom's blood pressure, temperature, and weight, making small talk the whole time. "Dr. Hayes will be right in," she said with a smile, and then the door closed, leaving us alone. Mom sat on the exam table, her feet dangling, barely touching the floor. I sat in the plastic chair beside her. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. In a few minutes, that door would open, and I would have to speak. I would have to shatter my mother's fragile peace and force her to confront the horror she'd been enduring. I would have to be strong enough for both of us. There was a soft knock, and then Dr. Hayes entered. He was in his mid-60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair that was thinning on top. He'd been our family doctor since Emma was born. "Michelle Ashley, good morning." He smiled warmly. "So I hear we had a little fall." Mom opened her mouth to respond, probably to repeat the lie I'd told on the phone, but I couldn't let her. Not this time. "Dr. Hayes," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. "Actually, it wasn't a fall." He stopped looking at his chart, then at me, his eyebrows furrowed with concern. "No, what happened then?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the point of no return. "I need to show you something," I said, "and I need to tell you a story. But please, you have to promise you'll listen to all of it." The seriousness in my voice made him close the chart. He pulled over the small rolling stool and sat down, giving me his full attention. "Ashley, you have my full attention." I told him everything. About Mom moving in, about the changes in her behavior, the fear, the isolation, about the bruises I'd noticed, about Matthew's reaction when I confronted him, how he'd made me feel like I was losing my mind. I told him about the camera, about the 5 nights of recordings, about what I'd seen, the verbal abuse, the physical intimidation, the threats, about the pills Matthew had forced down Mom's throat. As I spoke, I kept my eyes on Mom. She sat completely still, her head bowed, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She wasn't denying anything. She was crying because the truth, her terrible secret, was finally being spoken aloud. When I finished, a profound silence filled the small exam room. Dr. Hayes looked pale. He glanced from me to Mom and back to me, his professional composure cracking. "My God, Ashley," he whispered. He stood up and walked to the door. For a horrible moment, I thought he was going to leave, going to tell us he couldn't help. But instead, he locked the door, a soft click that sounded like a vault sealing shut. He came back and knelt in front of Mom, positioning himself so his eyes were level with hers. "Michelle," he said, and his voice was the gentlest I'd ever heard it. "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me, is what Ashley said true?" Mom lifted her head. Her face was ravaged with grief and fear, but for the first time in months, I saw something else there too. A deep exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who can't fight anymore. She looked at Dr. Hayes, the doctor she'd known and trusted for 2 decades, and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's all true. He's been doing this to you, Matthew." "Yes." "Tell me what he does, Michelle. I need to hear it from you." And then slowly, painfully, Mom began to talk. He comes into my room at night, after Ashley's asleep. He wakes me up and he says terrible things. He tells me I'm a burden, that I've ruined their lives, that I'm useless and old and disgusting. Her voice was gaining strength now, as if saying the words out loud was releasing something that had been trapped inside her. "Sometimes he grabs me, hard. It hurts. He leaves marks." She looked down at her arms. "He says if I tell Ashley, he'll send me away, to a bad place where no one will visit me." "And the pills, Michelle?" Dr. Hayes asked gently. "Does he give you medicine?" "Yes. He makes me take pills. Extra pills. He shoves them in my mouth and makes me swallow them even when I say no." She started crying again. "They make me so tired, so confused. I can barely wake up in the mornings." Dr. Hayes stood up. His jaw was clenched and I could see the anger he was working to control. He went to his computer and began typing rapidly, documenting every word. Then he took out a digital camera and turned to Mom. "Michelle, I need to examine you now. I need to document any injuries you have. Is that okay?" She nodded, and with my help she began to show him the marks. The fading thumbprint bruise on her forearm. The newer purple mark on her wrist. A red-brown bruise on her shoulder I hadn't even known about. Each one photographed, measured, documented with clinical precision. Every click of the camera shutter felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When he finished, Dr. Hayes printed out several pages and signed them. He turned to me, his face grave. "Ashley, what you've described and what Michelle has confirmed, along with the physical evidence I'm documenting, this is a clear case of elder abuse. As a physician in the state of Georgia, I'm classified as a mandatory reporter. That means I don't have a choice. I have a legal duty to report this to the authorities, immediately." My heart leaped into my throat. I'd known this was coming. Sarah had prepared me for it, but hearing the words made it real, made it irreversible. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. He picked up the phone on his desk. "I'm calling the Decatur Police Department. They'll likely send officers here to take statements and collect my report." He paused, looking at me with concern. "Are you ready for this, Ashley? Once I make this call, there's no going back." I looked at my mother, who seemed calmer now, more at peace. As if finally telling the truth, finally being believed, had lifted a crushing weight from her shoulders. I reached over and took her hand. "Yes," I told Dr. Hayes. "We're ready." He dialed. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the exam room door. Dr. Hayes opened it, and 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway. The first was an older man, probably in his 50s, with a weathered face and tired eyes. The second was a younger woman, maybe early 30s, with sharp, observant features and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Dr. Hayes," the older officer said. "I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Davis. We understand you have a situation to report. Yes, please come in." Dr. Hayes invited them into the exam room and closed the door behind them. The space suddenly felt very small with 5 people in it. Officer Miller glanced at Mom, then at me, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. Dr. Hayes handed his report to Officer Miller. "Everything I know is documented here, but Mrs. Williams has additional evidence." Both officers turned to look at me. This was it. The moment everything became official. The moment I stopped being a wife trying to understand her husband and became a witness reporting a crime. With hands that shook only slightly, I opened my purse and pulled out the plastic case containing the 5 memory cards. I held it out to Officer Davis. "I recorded these over the past week," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I installed a hidden camera in my mother's bedroom. These recordings show my husband. They show what he's been doing to her at night." Officer Davis took the case, her expression unreadable. She pulled out a laptop from her bag and powered it on. "May I?" she asked, holding up one of the memory cards. "Please," I said. She inserted the card from the 5th night, the one with the pills and the most explicit threats. The room fell into tense silence as the video began to play. I watched the officers' faces as they watched the screen. Officer Miller's jaw tightened. Officer Davis's eyes narrowed, and I saw her hand clench into a fist on the desk. When Matthew's voice came through the speakers, "I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find." Officer Davis's expression shifted from professional neutrality to cold, controlled anger. The video ended. Officer Davis closed the laptop slowly and looked at Officer Miller. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, Officer Miller spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mrs. Williams, how long has this been going on?" "I don't know for certain," I answered honestly. "I started suspecting a few weeks ago. I've been recording for 6 nights. He looked down at Dr. Hayes' report, his finger tracing the documented injuries. "The medical evidence corroborates what we saw on that video. Bruising consistent with gripping victim testimony, video documentation of the abuse." He turned to me. "Is your husband home right now?" "No. He's at work. He usually gets home around 6 o'clock. The 2 officers exchanged another look. "All right," Officer Miller said. "Here's what's going to happen. Officer Davis and I are going to head back to the station to file this report and prepare an arrest warrant. Given the video evidence and the medical documentation, I don't anticipate any issues getting that warrant approved." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not unkind. Mrs. Williams, I need you and your mother to go home and act as normally as possible. Don't confront your husband. Don't say anything about this. Just go about your day as if nothing has changed. The thought made my stomach turn. How could I go home and pretend everything was normal? How could I look Matthew in the face knowing what was coming? Officer Davis seemed to read my expression. I know it's difficult, she said gently, but we need to do this right. When your husband comes home this evening, we'll be there to make the arrest. Is he violent? Officer Miller asked. Do you think you or your mother will be in any danger between now and then? I hesitated. He's never been violent with me. I never imagined I never thought... Okay. Officer Davis pulled out a card and handed it to me. This has our direct numbers. If at any point you feel threatened, if he raises his voice, if anything feels off, you take your mother and you leave the house immediately. You call 911. Do you understand? I nodded, taking the card with numb fingers. Dr. Hayes put a gentle hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Ashley. You protected your mother. That's what matters. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I nodded anyway. The drive home felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life through a window. Mom sat beside me in the passenger seat, quiet but somehow lighter, as if telling the truth being believed had freed something inside her. Thank you, Ashley, she said softly as I pulled into our driveway. Thank you for believing me, for protecting me. I reached over and squeezed her hand, too emotional to speak. The afternoon stretched out like taffy, each minute taking an eternity to pass. I tried to read but couldn't focus. Tried to watch TV but the words didn't register. I made sandwiches for lunch that neither of us could eat. Mom stayed in her room resting. I envied her that escape. At 5:45, I heard the sound I'd been dreading. The garage door opening. Matthew's car pulling in. My entire body went rigid. He came through the kitchen door actually whistling, and tossed his keys onto the counter. Hey, honey, he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead. Long day. I had to use every ounce of willpower not to flinch away from his touch. Hi, I managed. How was work? The usual. Meetings, spreadsheets, conference calls. He opened the refrigerator and got a bottle of water. Where's your mom? She's resting in her room. He nodded unconcerned and took a long drink. What's for dinner? I'd completely forgotten about dinner. I was thinking maybe we could order pizza. Sure, sounds good. He headed toward the living room. I'm going to catch the news. Let me know when it gets here. I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter, and watched him settle onto the couch. Watched him flip on the television. Watched him act like a normal husband in a normal house having a normal evening. The monster wearing my husband's face. Every minute felt like torture. Where were they? The police said they'd come. It was past 6 now. Had something gone wrong? Had they changed their minds? At 6:23, there was a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock, a firm official knock. Matthew frowned and stood up. Are you expecting someone? No, I said, my heart in my throat. He walked to the front door and opened it. Officer Miller and Officer Davis stood on our porch under the yellow glow of the porch light. Matthew Williams, Officer Miller asked. Matthew looked confused. Yes. Can I help you, officers? Mr. Williams, we're here to place you under arrest for felony elder abuse. The world seemed to stop for a second. Matthew's face went through a rapid series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, then something that might have been fear. What? He laughed, but it sounded forced. Elder abuse. This is a mistake. There must be some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, sir, Officer Davis said, her voice cold and professional. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, please. This is ridiculous. His voice rose. I haven't done anything. This is because of her mother, isn't it? She's got dementia. She makes things up. She's confused. Sir, we've seen the video recordings, Officer Miller said firmly. Those words hit Matthew like a physical blow. All the color drained from his face. His eyes went wide and he turned to look at me, standing in the doorway to the living room. In that moment, I saw understanding dawn, and with it a flash of pure rage. Ashley, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What did you do? I forced myself to stand straight to meet his eyes. I protected my mother, like I should have done from the start. You recorded me. His voice was rising now, tinged with panic. You put cameras in our house. You spied on me. Mr. Williams, you need to turn around now. Officer Davis said, her hand moving to her belt where her handcuffs hung. Matthew took a step back into the house. "This is insane, Ashley, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." "Sir, don't make this harder," Officer Miller warned, but I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. "I saw what you did to her, Matthew," I said, and my voice didn't waver. "I saw you terrorize her, hurt her, force medication down her throat. I saw all of it." His face twisted with anger and something else, maybe desperation. "She's a burden. You don't see it, but she's ruining our lives, our marriage. Everything we had, I said quietly, died when you decided to abuse a sick elderly woman instead of being a decent human being. Turn around, Mr. Williams. Now." Officer Davis's voice left no room for argument. Finally, Matthew seemed to deflate. The fight went out of him all at once. He turned around and put his hands behind his back, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Officer Davis pulled out her handcuffs. The sound of them clicking closed around Matthew's wrists was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Final. Irreversible. "Matthew Williams, you're under arrest for felony elder abuse," Officer Miller said, beginning to read him his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent." They led him outside toward the police car parked at our curb, its lights casting red and blue shadows across our quiet suburban street. I stood in the doorway, watching. Before they put him in the car, Matthew turned and looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just emptiness. Cold, desolate emptiness. The door closed. The car pulled away, lights flashing silently into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Then I closed the front door and leaned against it, my body finally giving in to the shaking that had been building all day. It was over. The nightmare was over. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Mom standing there in her robe, her hand on the banister. She'd heard everything. Our eyes met across the hallway. Neither of us said a word. I walked to her, and we met at the bottom of the stairs. I wrapped my arms around her fragile body, and she held me tight. And there in the quiet house, mother and daughter finally cried together. Not from fear, not from sadness, from relief. Matthew spent the night in jail. The next afternoon, I received a call from Officer Davis. He'd been released on bail, but with strict conditions of full restraining order. He was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or my mother. He was absolutely forbidden from returning to our home. A friend of his, someone from his golf club, whose name I barely recognized, came by to pick up some of his belongings. I'd packed everything into cardboard boxes and left them on the front porch. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to talk to anyone who might try to defend him or make excuses. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. Every lock in the house was changed by that evening. The second thing I did was call Sarah Johnson. "I want to file for divorce," I told her, immediately. "I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow," she said. Signing those divorce papers felt strange, a single stroke of my pen undoing 30 years of history. But there was no hesitation, no doubt. The man I'd loved no longer existed if he ever truly had. The house without Matthew was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was peaceful. I took down his pictures from the walls, packed them away in boxes that went into the back of the attic. I needed to erase his presence to reclaim this space as ours, mine, and Mom's. Emma flew in from Austin as soon as she heard. She was shocked, devastated, angry, a whirlwind of emotions. But mostly she was there for her grandmother. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," Emma said, hugging Mom tight. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here to protect you." "You're here now, sweetheart," Mom said, patting her cheek. "That's what matters." The trial was set for 7 months later. 7 months of lawyers' meetings, depositions, and a constant low-grade anxiety that became my new normal. I met with the prosecutor assigned to the case, a woman named Diane Foster, with a reputation for being relentless in the courtroom, especially in cases involving vulnerable victims. "Mrs. Williams," she said when we first met, looking me straight in the eye, "I've seen the videos. We are going to get justice for your mother. I promise you that." Her confidence gave me strength I didn't know I had. 7 months passed in a blur. Mom's dementia progressed slowly but steadily. There were good days and bad days, but the fear that had haunted her for months was finally gone. Then, on a crisp September morning, the day of the trial arrived. I wore my navy suit again, my armor. I helped Mom into a pretty floral dress and cardigan. Emma wore a simple black dress. The three of us looked like soldiers preparing for battle. The Decatur County Courthouse was an imposing stone building that made me feel small, but we walked in with our heads held high. Inside the courtroom, I saw Matthew for the first time since his arrest. He was thinner, his suit hanging loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. When our eyes met for a brief second, I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a distant acknowledgement that this man was once my husband, and now he was a stranger. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge entered, an older man with a stern face and gray hair. He took his seat behind the high bench. "This court is now in session. The state of Georgia versus Matthew Williams." Diane Foster stood straightening her blazer. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed." The defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit with a practiced smile, stood as well. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on the first day, telling the jury everything: why I'd installed the camera, what I'd seen, how my mother had changed after moving in with us. On cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to paint me as a paranoid, hysterical wife, but I stayed calm, answered every question honestly, and let the evidence speak for itself. Mom testified next, with Diane asking her gentle yes or no questions. The defense tried to confuse her, firing rapid questions about dates and times, but her fragility was more powerful than any perfect answer could have been. Dr. Hayes presented his medical report and the photographs of Mom's injuries, explaining in clinical terms why the marks were consistent with forceful gripping, not accidental bumps. And then came the videos. A large screen was wheeled into the courtroom. The lights were dimmed. Diane played all 5 videos, one after another. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the monster in my house was laid bare for all to see. Matthew's voice hissing threats in the darkness. The sound of him grabbing Mom of her gagging as he forced pills down her throat. I couldn't watch the screen again. Instead, I watched the jury. I saw a middle-aged woman clap her hand over her mouth in horror. I saw a young man's jaw clench with anger. I saw disgust and outrage on every face. By the time the last video ended and the lights came back up, the entire atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. No one looked at Matthew with neutrality anymore. They looked at him with contempt. After closing arguments, the jury filed out to deliberate. We waited for 3 hours. Mom, Emma, and I sat on the hard wooden benches holding hands, saying nothing. Finally, the bailiff appeared. "They have a verdict." My heart stopped. The jury filed back in their faces, unreadable. The foreperson, a middle-aged man with glasses, stood with a piece of paper in his hand. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Matthew Williams on the charge of felony elder abuse, what is your verdict?" The foreperson looked directly at the judge, not at Matthew. "On the charge of felony elder abuse, we the jury find the defendant." The pause felt like an eternity. "Guilty." The word guilty echoed through the courtroom like a bell. Emma sobbed beside me. I squeezed Mom's hand so tight I was afraid I might hurt her, but she just smiled a peaceful, serene smile. Matthew was sentenced 2 weeks later to 16 months in a state correctional facility, followed by 2 years of probation. While he served his time, our divorce was finalized. The house was mine. Life after the trial was strange. The immediate danger was gone, but the wreckage remained. Mom's dementia continued to progress. For a year, things were actually better. The therapy helped, the safety of our home helped, Emma's frequent visits helped, but eventually the disease won. She started getting lost in our own house. She'd forget where she was, who I was. She needed 24-hour care that I, heartbroken, though I was to admit it, could no longer provide alone. With Emma's help, I found a beautiful assisted living facility with gardens and kind nurses and activities every day. The day Mom moved in, we both cried. But she seemed content, safe. I visited her every single day. Mom passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep. I was holding her hand. She'd been gone from us mentally for a while by then, but in those final moments, I'd like to think she knew she was loved. Today, I'm 61 years old. I live alone in this house that was once full of laughter, then pain, and now quiet peace. Matthew was released from prison over 3 years ago. I heard through the grapevine that he moved upstate lives reclusively. He lost his job, his friends, his family. He lost everything he'd tried to protect with his cruelty. Sometimes late at night, I sit on the back porch and think about those 30 years. Were the signs always there? Or did Daniel's death break something in him so fundamentally that a monster was released? I'll never know. But what I've learned is this evil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. It comes with a familiar smile, with logical excuses, with the face of someone you love. I've learned that you must always listen to that small voice inside that says something is wrong. And I've learned the hardest way possible that protecting a vulnerable person is worth infinitely more than keeping the peace, avoiding confrontation, or saving the appearance of a happy marriage. Real strength isn't enduring pain silently. It's having the courage to turn on a light in the darkest of places.